Hello and thank you for joining me today. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be doing a lavender field. This was a request made quite a few weeks ago now by Karen, who asked if I could show her how to do a lavender field. Now if you've got any requests of your own, if you want to pop those in the comments below, whether it's a specific media or whether it's a subject that you'd like me to do, if you want to put that down in the comments below, it's great for me because it gives me ideas of things that you might like. Okay, so to get on with this, I went on to Pixabay and had a look for some pictures of lavender fields, and there was loads, there were so many nice ones, really nice ones, so it was difficult to choose some. But I actually also printed off one of a close-up of a lavender, because if you're doing something like this, you need to be familiar with the subject. And obviously these are French lavenders, quite different to the ones the English ones that I have in my garden, I think the varieties of Munstead and Hidcote I have, which are obviously the tough ones that we need here in Cumbria. So they're quite different, a little bit more purpley than mine. Mine are a bit more blue than that, but it's good to have the actual form of the flower rather than just looking at the field. So you maybe want to use some of these in the foreground. So I'm not actually going to stick to one photograph, I'm going to make my own composition up really. I like, to begin with, I like this one because it's got a little strip of background in there, these very distant hills and some nice trees that we could have a go at. I might not bother with the buildings, I just might make it trees in the trees and hills and have the focus on the lavender with all these rows going towards that. And put, like I said, put some more detailed lavenders in the foreground where they're much closer to us. Now if you look at the end here, they're sort of domed. If you think about a plant of lavender in your own garden, it makes that little bit of a dome. So at the horizon here, we've got a dome shape for each one. So that's something we need to be careful about when we draw a horizon line. We don't want to draw in a straight line. We want to get these domes in where the end of each little row is. So similarly on this one, you can see this one plant in the foreground here is a really nice dome shape. So that's one shape you need to pick up to put in your lavender field picture. Obviously the other shape you need is these rows, which are all evenly spaced because they've obviously been planted very carefully in nice even rows so that they're easy to harvest. And you can see the difference between the plants here. So we've got a stripe of purple there, followed by a stripe of green, and then the purple again, where we've got individual plants. So that's something else that you're going to notice. And if you look further down, you can see that we go green, purple, where those domes of each individual plant are as well. And obviously the further away we get, the less detail we've got. So here we've just really got colour, and then when we come closer to where the photograph was taken, we've got much more detail. Okay, so slightly different colours there. Some of it may be exactly the same lavender, but the colours might change depending on the light and the time of day and things. Blue does tend to alter quite a lot in different lights, so be aware of that and mix up quite a few different blues and mauves. Don't just use one. Go right the way from pink through to deep purple with lots of different variations in between. Okay, so I'm going to use this hot pressed watercolour pad. You might prefer to use a not one, but I like the hot pressed paper, and this one is £140. And I've already, if you can see, I've already put a bit of a margin on. It's good to work with a margin. It means you've got somewhere to test your colours, but it also means if you did want to have it framed in the future, it makes it a lot easier than working right up to the edge of the paper. Okay, so I'm just checking that's level in the camera. So now to begin with, like I said, I'm just going to sort of do a bit of a mixture of these pictures. I'm not going to do any one particular photograph, but you can go onto Pixabay and have a look. So I'm just going to put a thin strip of sky at the top and have more foreground than I have sky, and some imaginary hills in the background there. Just one or two. Bringing the eye back down this way, we'll have one coming this way as well. Okay, so some hills there, and then maybe some trees in the foreground like we had here, these kind of trees here, a nice straight strong row of trees, some taller ones, some more domed. These are sort of some shrubs in somebody's garden, I think, the ones I can see on the photograph, and some bigger trees here. So not using my pencil a lot, just putting some guidelines in really. And then I'll have some trees over this side. Nice row perhaps pointing back into the picture, and then like I said, we'll go along with that where the edge of the field is, where these domes are, and leave a little gap in between each one, and those are making the end of your lavender field rose. So you might not be able to see this pencil show up too much to you, but it'll give you an idea of what I'm doing. So now it's actually going to be quite easy to start with one that's in the middle. So we're going to go with this one and make it come really nice and wide as you come towards the foreground, so that we can put that detail in the foreground and so that we get a massive sense of distance. So that looks huge, but then if you look at the photograph, you see what I mean. This is a long way away. We need that distance. So we've got a gap between the first two, but then after that, because they're much further away from us, you can't see the gaps. You can see the gap at the top a little bit, and then they converge. Again. So we don't really need these lines in as such, it's just to show us where to go a little bit darker with the colour maybe, and where the stripes of green are, and a lot of that's going to get covered up with the paint. Okay, so that's enough pencil work. Unless we wanted to draw some of these ones in the foreground here, which we could do, I'll just get... So if we want it like this, we could have a dome of one plant sort of coming up to about here somewhere, and just put that dome shape in, because of course we can come back and rub these guidelines out later, and then maybe just pick out one or two of these flower shapes. And if you become familiar with the flower shapes, it means that when you're actually drawing the rose in and you're aware of what's there, they'll be much more accurate. Yeah, but I think this is going to be easier just to do it with paint afterwards. I'll put one or two in, just with some dots and dashes of the brush. It'll be easier than doing all the pencil work. Okay, so I'm going to leave that now as far as the pencil goes, and I'll go and get some paint. So to begin with, I've just made up two colours. This one is the Winsor blue with a tiny touch of alizarin crimson, and this is some cerulean blue with plenty of water, so there's hardly any pigment in there at all, because I don't want much colour in the sky at all. When we want the focus to be on the foreground and what's going on in the foreground, we don't want complicated skies and backgrounds, so keep it quite simple. So because it's only a very thin strip of sky with very little colour in it, I'm not actually wetting the paper first. I'm just going to very quickly fill it in. Before it dries, so we don't get any kind of line or anything. And where those trees are, we can go straight over the top, because the trees are going to be more darker in tone than the sky, so they'll easily sit on top of it without the sky showing through. Okay, so just for nice and quick, so nothing's drying, and we get a nice flat wash of a little strip of sky at the top. And then again onto the mountains behind, and these also have plenty of water in this mixture. I'll just go around these trees a little bit, this foreground. And if you want to tilt your book, I should have put a prop underneath just to stop your mountains going back up into your sky. But because it's such a sunny, hazy day, really that little touch of blue going up into the sky isn't a problem at all. And because these are going to fade to be very pale, there's hardly going to be a noticeable difference between the mountains and the sky, because they're such a long way in the distance. You can just prop your book up so that the hills don't go back into the sky, or alternatively, unlike me, you could have had a bit more patience and left the sky to dry before you put the mountains in. Okay, and now we need to leave that to dry. Now whilst that was drying, you'll see I've just put a little tin of pencils underneath. Pencil tins are quite handy for propping up your pad whilst you're working, just to make sure that things aren't going back up into your sky. But I do think it's actually pretty dry now. So I've made up a few colours. These are Winsor blue with cadmium yellow, so exactly the same two colours in each of these mixes, but this has got more yellow in and this has got more blue. And then this one was the Winsor blue with some burnt sienna to make a nice dark colour for the base of the trees. But I'm not going to put a lot of detail at all in these trees. Just pick out some of these shapes and with a couple of greens and not too many greens in the background to complicate things, keeping it simple again to have the focus on the actual lavenders themselves. So just keep alternating between these two greens that you've made up. Use the tip of your brush to make some nice tree shapes. These are sort of going up in a fan, very Mediterranean looking, not like anything we've got around here. These three, I think they're probably part of somebody's garden, and they're actually the ones I'm looking at on this photograph. They're more garden plants than that have been pruned to be in this nice dome shape. And then with that same dark one, I'll put one or two of the bushes in the garden as well. Just dashes and dabs really. And then I'll get the more yellowy one. It's midsummer, there's lots of yellows around. Lots of nice bright green foliage. Let those two mix into each other as well. You may even want to put a touch of yellow in one or two places on these, just to brighten them up a little. And then come over to some of these at this side. Use the tip of your brush to make a few shapes, but really keep it quite abstract and impressionistic. Don't worry too much about lots of detail with shapes of trees. Have a bit of mid-ground going across here, which will help push those mountains into the background. Leave one or two gaps in places, go a bit higher in places, just to give a bit of an impression of distance, fields, gates, whatever. I'm going to get some more of the more green, more blue-green should I say, and just pop it in different places. So your tip of the brush can just make an upright tree in the distance. So the thing about painting wet in wet and doing distance like this, you know, very impressionistic, is to have your paint ready mixed up. If you have to keep stopping to make extra paint, it makes life a lot more difficult. So now I've got the darker colour, but I've not gone really dark. I've not got black or anything like that, just some more greeny colour, bluey green with that burnt sienna in, just for some trunks. Again, pop one or two bits in, perhaps underneath, a couple of lines, as if we've got some shadows maybe. Light bounces around a lot, you know, it's very Mediterranean. The light's going to be quite high in the sky. These trees are casting shadows on themselves as well as things around them. Just feel it needs to be a little darker, so I'm just going to get a bit more of the sienna with quite a dry brush straight from the pan, mix it into there. No more water really. And we could get an umber on some French ultramarine to go even darker, but I think we'll keep it nice and simple, just a few colours. And just pop those into the base, where of course the shadows would be. You're not going to get shadows on the top of the trees where the light's shining. There's one or two in between. So I'm not really looking at a photograph or anything with this, I'm just making it up as I go along. Imagining there's some light bouncing around and these various tree shapes are casting shadows and things. Okay, and I think we should call that a day for that little strip of interest in the background there and move on to the lavender field itself. We've actually, thinking about it, we've got a bit of a strip of nothing in between where I put the domes and that, so I think we'll make that more of a hedge. If you look at this one, there's quite a bit of a hedge in the foreground here, which the purple's going to show up again. So just think, well, should we just think about this for a minute? If we put a strip of ground there that's opposite to purple or violet, that's going to be yellow. So I think it would be nice to have the ground much more yellow than it is on here and have that at that back strip there, because then the purple is going to really show up against it with that contrast. So I'll mix up now some raw sienna, which is a lovely yellow, nice natural earth colour, which could be very much like the earth that we've got there, the nice dry sandy earth that I'm assuming that they grow lavenders in. And I'm just going to go across that strip at the end there and see how that's going into that, all those greens. We'll go around those domes that we did earlier. You might not be able to see the pencil lines, but you'll remember me putting those domes there. So because the pad is propped on that little pencil case, colours run down into this, but the yellow doesn't go back up. So you might want to alter that. You might think, actually, well, I want it the other way around. So just think about where your pad's lying, and maybe even sometimes just picking it up and tilting it around. Again, you could have left that back strip to completely dry before you moved on. But you've got a nice hazy feel actually having it all mixed together there. And if there's anything at this point you don't like, you can lift it out. So here it's come right across here. We can lift some of that out, and then that actually makes a nice little bit of a streak of light there. Dry your brush off in between. Here actually this is quite nice, it looks like a bit of a shadow from this tree, but you might want to lift a little bit out. Lift a bit out in between the trees as if the light's just managing to catch through there. So whilst it's wet, have a play with your brush, just having some areas of light where the light might be popping through. And see here where it's where we've gone over those domes and it's all pooling down there. That'll give us a nice crisp edge. But if you want to lift some of that out now, you can do just by popping the edge of your brush there. And we'll come down with that yellow all the way between those two rows where we could see the ground. So although I wasn't particularly following one photograph, here I've followed this where we've got these nice two very obvious lines. You could put a wash of this underneath the whole thing and then allow put the purple over the top, but actually it's probably much easier just to do it this way. And I'm going to mix up a little bit of the cadmium yellow just on its own as well, a nice strong mix, and just pop that in one or two places as well, because we want it to be nice and sunny. We wanted that earth colour because it looks more natural than the cadmium, but if we just pop the cadmium in one or two areas, it's really going to lift the whole thing, and it also sends those mountains back again. And it's going to form a very good contrast to the violets when we start putting those in. You may even want to come back to these trees and put a little touch of yellow in the top of them where the sun's shining. That's starting to dry now, and whilst that's been drying, I've mixed up some more colours. So I've got Permanent Rose, Winsor Violet, and I made up some more of the Winsor Blue, and we'll use these for the lavender. Like I say, the colours of the blues and the mauves will change throughout the day and depending on the variety of the lavender, but it's nice to get a bit of a mixture in, so we get a few different tones and shades. And I'm going to use this same green as we used in the background. You might see I've got a little bit of that rose on here. I was trying to take it out of the palette just to see what colour it was, because I couldn't remember, and when I flicked it up it went everywhere, so we've got one or two little flecks of pink already there. So to begin with, I want to start right at the back and work forward, and I'll start by putting I'm going to put some extra water into that violet, because when I'm looking at it they're quite pale in the background. And just start by making those dome shapes. Again, it might just run up a little bit into, this is more or less dry. I wouldn't say it was dry, I would say it was more or less dry. And I'm going to carry on working and work wet into wet. I didn't really have a plan too much when I started doing this, other than I did want to work wet into wet and just see how it went. Just making some of these shapes. So just with the tip of your brush, make that dome shape and allow it to fall backwards towards you. Pull it along a little bit, and we'll keep working quite quickly, and as we come towards the foreground we'll use more pigment. We missed the middle one, didn't we? And think about those dome shapes and moving your brush in the shape of that dome, not just filling the line in. Also, that will mean we've got some light in between. So when you're doing a painting, whatever painting you're doing, you don't want too much detail right at the edges. You want your detail to be more towards the centre. So don't faff about doing lots of detail at the sides here, but keep moving your brush in that direction. Okay, so we've put quite a bit of mauve in there now. We'll change colours and we'll put a little bit of the blue in. Maybe in between a little bit, so that we're making some stripes as we go along. Let the colours merge together on the paper. And obviously the light's catching in different areas. So if I go quiet, I'm just concentrating. And we don't want to come much further forward than this without starting to put a bit of extra detail in. In fact, what I will do is I'll put the detail on top of some of this. So I will come further forward and I'll let it dry, and I will put some extra detail on. You can see those two colours are mixing quite nicely on the paper. Trying to keep those as if we've got some rose going on. So with anything that you're painting, move your brush in the direction of the object that you're painting. And some of the pink, we've not put much pink in yet. There's quite a bit of pink towards the tips of the lavender, especially at the front. It's perhaps catching the light more, so I wouldn't put the pink right into the back. I think it seems to be more at the front, just to give us that impression it's catching the light more at the front. But we will need some green in this as well, in between these rows. It's starting to dry really nicely. I'm not worrying too much about where it's drying with these edges whilst I'm working on other areas, because can you see it's the colours dragging towards here, and they're separating quite nicely, these three colours, and that's making a nice shape there, so I'm not going to worry too much about that drying out. So we can't see too much green further back, but we can sort of in the foreground a bit, there's bits of green in between the rows that we can see, so let's just pop a tiny bit in. Like I said, I don't want too much detail at the edges of the picture, so we'll do the edges first and leave the detail out. So in between the rows there is little bits of green. Sort of lost a bit of a shape there of the row, so you can lift that off as well if you want. And we'll leave those colours to merge so that we're not making a mess there and overworking it. And we'll go back to these rows that have got more detail in them. So I'm going to make this a little bit heavier as I come forward, so I'll just bring it forward a bit before I do that. It's about the halfway mark, or should I say halfway along the lavender rows, not halfway along the painting. Go on to the edge of that yellow path there because they're hanging over the path. And then we'll make these colours a little bit stronger. So I won't get any more water out, but oops, I've put that in the wrong one. Sorry about that. I'll have to make a new mix of the Winsor Violet. So there we go. A lot more of the pigment and a lot less water. On the palette they look very similar because they're next to each other and they both just look very dark on the palette. So now we're going to start with some of these further forward ones to actually, and nearer to us, to actually make some dome shapes in strokes. So still going in a dome formation, but using the tip of the brush to make some strokes. Don't worry about what's going on up here, that'll sort itself out. And if it doesn't, we can lift it out afterwards. And in amongst there we're going to need some green. So I'll just leave a gap between the row there. And of course nearer to us, nearer the foreground, these strokes are going to be bigger. And then closer together the further back we go. An alternative to doing it all wet in wet and quite quickly like I'm doing would be you could do the whole thing like this, just merging your colours, and then you could come in on top and paint these on top of this, or you could do it in pencil or something on top as well. And I think we've got a very strong colour at the foreground now. I think just in between one or two of these lines, this is still very wet. I'm just going to emphasise some of these lines because it's casting shadow. Here at the top it's drying out a little. It's actually quite nice just to pick up one or two shapes of those lines. But it's going to be darker in between the lines where we're casting shadow on themselves. We've got a little bit of shade going on here as well. And having more form in the foreground again sends these mountains away from us. Sorry if my hand's in the way, I'm actually standing to do this and being quite lazy leaning on the table. So these lines I'm making here, it's not the form of the flowers at all, it's just an impression, because the only detailed flowers we're going to have is in this central dome here. And again, I'm going to just put 1 or 2 bits of shadow in between some of these lines. I can still vaguely see my pencil lines. If there's any you're not too happy with, that you feel are a bit harsh, and you want to just get a very damp brush and soften them off, you can do as well. Okay, so we'll come back to this central piece. Whilst this is drying off a little bit, I'll come back in a minute to that and put some extra green in. And of course all these again are going in a dome. You'll see how I'm using both the tip of the brush and the side of the brush to make a longer shape for these ones that are going to be much closer to us. And I'm going to stop at where that dome is, because I'll probably do that after it's dried, that foreground piece. So now I'm going to go back to the green. And if we use the green that we used in the background, it makes it quite a harmonious picture, not using too many colours. Everything's going to be balanced throughout the picture. So we'll just put some, exactly the same as we did with the purple, a few spikes with the end of the brush. Now there's quite a lot of white paper showing here. I don't mind, it looks like we've got quite a lot of light bouncing around. If you didn't want the white paper showing through, you could have done put the yellow all the way across the raw sienna. So this, although this isn't dry, I'm just letting the green mix in quite a bit with those, the Winsor violet, and keeping making those spiky shapes in this foreground area. The same on this side. And I know I'm repeating myself, I've said this before in lots of my demonstrations and tutorials. You will obviously have quite, hopefully, more time than I've had to do this. I like to keep things quite quick, just to give you ideas of how you can tackle these subjects. But you can spend more time doing your drawing and more time doing your painting than I've got. To make a more polished picture at the end. But I actually quite like this, quite impressionistic and not being too detailed. So I'm just going to make up a little bit more of that green, and I think I'll come back to you when this has dried off a little bit. Now that's dried off a bit, I'm just going to add some extra green into here and keep building up these background areas. And it's quite nice actually to leave some of that white as well, have a bit of light throughout the painting. It's Mediterranean and it's midsummer, so we do need plenty of light. Some more of the green down here. Brighten this area up a bit, just so we've got a variety of greens. I made quite a stronger mix. This is a stronger mix than the one I put on before. It doesn't matter if you overlap the colours that are already here. And then straight from the palette, just with a damp brush, I'm going to get some of the permanent rose. Nice and thick, and add some pink to this. Just in little dots and dashes. Really warms the whole thing up. Again, using the side of a brush to make the shape of the lavender heads. And this extra bit of detail, although it's not really detail, this extra detail again brings this forward from the centre ground and the mountains behind. So really now we're sort of really pushing those mountains back. I'm going to carry on putting some more pink into these ones, maybe a little bit of the blue as well. It was rather nice, this blue colour that we've got up here, the Winsor blue. And then I will do these at the foreground and I'll put extra detail in there. So I'll probably speed the video up at this point and come back to you later when I've finished doing all that, because it's going to be a bit tedious just watching me do these dots and dashes using the tip of the brush and these few colours. And I'll use the colours much more strongly straight from the palette. Completely dry now, and you can see that I changed my mind about the foreground. I decided to keep it quite impressionistic. The scale would have been all wrong if I'd have gone in with too much detail in those foreground flowers like I wanted to, but you could have a go at doing an observation of the close-up of the flower to begin with before you go on to doing your field, just to give you a feel for the flower itself and how they're made up. But basically you can just use the shape of your brush, because they go in a dome, the whole plant goes in a dome, so we've got this nice shape here. So these are two things to remember. We've got these dome shapes and we need the rows evenly spread. So as long as we keep the shape of the rows and we keep that feeling of these domes that we've got going on. But also use the side of your brush, because the whole flower shape, although it's made up of lots of little buds, the whole flower shape is pretty much the shape of your brush, so just use that to dab on the colour. Now I'm not too happy with this area here. I've used too much pink in it, quite a lot of purple and blue in there as well, and it's come out very heavy and dominant compared to some of the rest of the picture. It's way too heavy. This is lovely. I really like the background where we've just left it really nice and loose. Would have been quite nice if we'd have come all the way down with that and then maybe just put one or two flowers on top of it, I'm not sure. But I'm not happy with this little bit here. So I was going to finish at that, but actually I just thought, well, maybe we can do something about that with the art bar, just to lighten it up a bit. So I'll use this colour here. Can't see what colour it is. No, it's lost its label. And it's a very, very pale, what I would call baby blue. And if we just put a haze over it, it's just going to get rid of some of that heaviness that we've got there. And it could be just some hazy sunshine coming over the top. But obviously make sure that this is dry when you do this. And then just rub it in a little bit. And you could do with this, you could add some acrylic paint, you could add some wax pastels. There's all sorts of things you can do to lighten things up. So I'll just use a little bit of the pink, which is really pretty. And keep that shape of the dome going with your finger and rub that in. I've not used these before with watercolours, but I don't see why we shouldn't just use them on top of the watercolour. Just a chink of light there, I didn't like that line. Okay, so we could get carried away with this, couldn't we? It's nice how you can make some of the shapes of the rose there with it. But the lighter colours, the good thing about these art bars is you can put lighter colours on top of the darker colours where you've gone a bit too heavy. So I'm fiddling now. Okay, so not that successful in this area, but I do like parts of it. I like how the mountains have gone into the distance because we've got all this colour in the foreground and we use such a little amount of colour in the background that's really very sunny, summery day, having those mountains going right into the distance. And I think there's just enough detail in these trees and this line here to give us a little bit of an interest on the horizon, and then put in the main focus so we've got more than 2/3 of the picture of the actual field itself for those lovely colours of all the mauves and blues and pinks together. If you didn't want to be quite so colourful, you could keep it just to the blues and the mauves without all this extra pink in, and that would be quite pretty too, keeping it quite simple. Okay, so like I said earlier in the video, this was a request from Karen. If you've got any requests, you can pop them in the comments below and I'll get on with those as soon as possible. I do work a few weeks in advance, so it may take me a week or two to come around to doing it, but if you have any requests for particular styles, subjects or techniques, if you want to put those in the comments below, and I'll do those if I can. Okay, so thank you very much for watching. Enjoy doing that if you have a go, and let me know how you get on, and bye bye for now.